In the autumn of 1529, a shadow fell across the heart of Europe. On the horizon, a force unlike any seen before gathered, its banners stretching as far as the eye could see. This was the army of the Ottoman Empire, led by the magnificent Sultan Suleiman, and it had come to the gates of Vienna. What happened next would echo through the centuries. The fate of a continent hung in the balance, resting on the shoulders of a few thousand defenders inside a city that would soon become a legend. This is the story of the Siege of Vienna. The early 16th century was an age of titans in the east. Suleiman the Magnificent ruled over an empire that was the envy of the world. It was a vast and powerful realm stretching from the deserts of Arabia to the plains of Hungary, a multicultural giant built on military might and administrative genius. Suleiman's ambition knew no bounds. After his decisive victory at the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, the Kingdom of Hungary had fractured, and its heartlands fell under Ottoman control. With this strategic gateway secured, Suleiman's gaze turned westward. Vienna, the glistening capital of the Habsburg Archduchy of Austria, was more than just a city. It was the symbolic heart of the Holy Roman Empire, a Christian bastion, and the final doorway into Central Europe. To conquer Vienna was to break the spirit of his rivals and open a path into the wealthy lands of Germany and Italy. For Suleiman, it was the next logical step in his divine mission to expand his empire. For Europe, it was a threat that promised to reshape the known world. The stage was set for a confrontation that would define an era. In the spring of 1529, the largest army of its age began its march from Constantinople. Over 100,000 soldiers, including the elite janissaries and the fearsome Sipahi cavalry, set out on the long road to Vienna. With them, they brought thousands of pack animals, supplies, and a colossal artillery train of 300 cannons, weapons designed to shatter the strongest walls in Christendom. It was a procession of immense power, a city on the move. But the empire's greatest asset, its sheer size, soon became its greatest vulnerability. The spring of 1529 was exceptionally wet. Relentless rains turned the Balkan roads into impassable rivers of mud. Supply wagons sank up to their axles, and the heaviest cannons, the pride of the Ottoman army, had to be abandoned one by one along the treacherous route. Disease spread through the camps, and the morale of the troops began to wane with each exhausting step. The march, which should have been a triumphant procession, became a grueling battle against nature itself. When the Ottoman army finally arrived before Vienna in late September, it was a force depleted, exhausted, and critically short of the heavy artillery it needed to bring the city to its knees. The weather had already claimed its first victory inside Vienna. The news of Suleiman's approach had created a wave of panic. The city's original garrison was small, numbering only a few thousand. But as the Ottomans drew closer, reinforcements trickled in. German landsnake mercenaries and Spanish arquebusiers, veterans of the Italian wars, arrived to bolster the defenses. In the end, a mixed force of roughly 20,000 defenders stood ready to face the Ottoman horde, commanded by the 70-year-old Nicholas Graf Somme, a seasoned and respected general. The Viennese knew they were outnumbered at least 5-1. Their survival depended not on meeting the enemy in the open field, but on the strength of their medieval walls. Under Somme's direction, the city became a fortress. Every able-bodied citizen was put to work. They reinforced the ancient stone walls, building earthen ramparts behind them to absorb the shock of cannonballs. They sealed all but one of the city gates, dug defensive trenches, and boarded up buildings to create fire breaks. Inside the walls, the atmosphere was a mixture of grim determination and fervent prayer. They were preparing for a siege they feared might be their last, a final stand against the tide. On September 27th, the Ottoman army fully encircled Vienna. The siege began. The Viennese watched from their ramparts as a sea of tents rose on the plains around them, a city of canvas and silk inhabited by their enemies. Ottoman cannons, though fewer and lighter than planned, opened fire. But their shots often sank into the damp earthworks the defenders had so wisely constructed, causing minimal damage to the main walls. Suleiman, realizing a simple bombardment would not be enough, ordered his engineers to begin a different kind of warfare: mining. Elite Ottoman sappers started digging tunnels, or mines, toward the city walls, intending to pack them with gunpowder and blast breaches for the infantry to pour through. The defenders responded with their own tunnels, or countermines. Listening for the faint sounds of digging underground, the siege became a dark, subterranean war. Above ground, skirmishes erupted daily as defenders launched daring raids to disrupt the Ottoman works. The days turned into weeks. The initial Ottoman assaults were thrown back with heavy losses. The weather worsened, with early autumn snows beginning to fall. Supplies were running low on both sides, and time was running out for the besiegers. By mid-October, the situation for the Ottoman army was critical. A final, major assault on the Kurnurter, or Corinthian Gate, was planned after a large mine had successfully created a breach in the wall. On October 14th, the Janissaries charged forward with immense courage, determined to break the deadlock. But the defenders were ready. They met the attack with a storm of arquebus fire, pikes, and sheer desperate will. The breach became a killing ground, and the attack was repulsed. Suleiman had to face a bitter reality. His army was exhausted, short on food, and facing the onset of a harsh winter. His window of opportunity had closed. That night, the sound of screams was heard from the Ottoman camp, a grim ritual where they killed their prisoners before beginning their retreat. The siege was over. The great Ottoman army began its long, painful journey home, harassed by the weather and the celebrating defenders. Vienna had held. It was a victory against all odds, a moment where a city's resolve had halted an empire's advance. The legend of Vienna's defiance would inspire Europe for generations, a testament to the idea that even in the face of overwhelming power, courage and preparation can turn the tide of history. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, please like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that shaped our world. Beneath the city, a second, unseen war raged in total darkness. The Ottomans, masters of siege engineering, began to dig. Their elite miners, known as the Lagenkler, tunneled relentlessly towards Vienna's foundations. Their goal was simple, yet terrifying, to pack the tunnels with gunpowder and blow the walls sky high. Day and night, the faint, muffled thud of pickaxes echoed beneath the feet of the city's defenders. It was a constant, gnawing threat, a reminder that the enemy was not just outside the walls, but also burrowing directly underneath them. But the Viennese were not idle. They learned to listen. Bowls of water or tantrum skins were placed on the ground, designed to tremble at the slightest vibration from below. When a new tunnel was detected, Vienna's own miners would spring into action. These were not soldiers, but ordinary men miners, gravediggers, and laborers who became the city's subterranean guardians. They dug countermines, racing to intercept the Ottoman tunnels in a deadly underground maze. The clashes that followed were the stuff of nightmares. In cramped, lightless passages, men fought with shovels, picks, and daggers. A wrong turn could lead to a cave-in, burying friend and foe alike. A sudden breach could result in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle where there was no room to swing a sword and no chance of escape. In this war of shadows, the only light came from flickering torches that consumed the precious air. Dust choked their lungs, the earth threatened to collapse, and the enemy could be just inches away, on the other side of a wall of dirt. It was a claustrophobic, visceral struggle for survival, a silent, desperate battle that would determine whether Vienna's walls would stand or fall. On October 9th, the Ottomans detonated a massive mine beneath the Corinthian gate. The explosion ripped a huge breach in the wall, and thousands of Janissaries surged forward, expecting to finally break the city. But the defenders were ready. They had anticipated the attack and built a secondary earthwork barricade just behind the breach. As the Janissaries poured through the gap, they were met with a wall of pikes, arquebus fire, and sheer determination. The fighting was ferocious, a chaotic whirlwind of steel and smoke. For hours, the Ottomans threw wave after wave at the breach, only to be thrown back each time by the exhausted but unbroken defenders. 2 days later, another mine exploded, creating a second breach. Again, the Janissaries attacked, and again, the defenders held. These were the moments that tested the soul of the city. The defenders were outnumbered, outgunned, and running low on supplies. They fought with the desperation of people defending their homes, their families, their very existence. The psychological toll was immense. The constant bombardment, the threat of the lines, and the endless assaults pushed them to the limits of human endurance. Yet, they did not break. Their resilience was a silent act of defiance against one of the most powerful empires on earth. Suleiman the Magnificent had expected a swift and glorious victory. He had brought an army of over 100,000, the largest and most advanced military force of its time. He had siege cannons that could pulverize stone walls and an elite corps of Janissaries who had never known defeat. Vienna, by contrast, was defended by a mere fraction of that number. Its fortifications were old, and its garrison was a patchwork of mercenaries and local militia. On paper, it should have been an easy conquest. But war is never fought on paper. As the siege dragged on, an unexpected and formidable enemy joined the fray. Winter. The autumn of 1529 arrived with a vengeance. Unseasonably early and brutally cold, it brought with it torrential rains that turned the Ottoman camp into a quagmire of mud. The supply lines, already stretched thin over hundreds of miles, began to collapse. Food became scarce. Camels, brought from the warm lands of the east, began to die in the freezing conditions. The once mighty Ottoman army was now bogged down, not just by the defenders of Vienna, but by the very elements themselves. Disease, the constant companion of armies, began to spread through the camp. Dysentery, fever, and frostbite took a relentless toll. The soldiers, weakened by hunger and exhaustion, were easy prey. Morale plummeted. The Janissaries, the pride of the Sultan's army, grew mutinous. They had been promised a quick victory and rich plunder, not a slow, miserable death in the mud and snow. They had stormed the breaches with courage, but even their legendary discipline began to crack under the weight of starvation and sickness. Suleiman, watching his grand army disintegrate before his eyes, faced a bitter reality. The walls of Vienna were not the only thing he could not break. He could not break the weather, he could not break the disease, and he could not break the spirit of the city's defenders. On October 14th, Suleiman ordered one last, desperate assault. He offered his troops triple pay and promised them glory, but their hearts were no longer in it. The attack was half-hearted and quickly repulsed. The fire that had driven the Ottoman war machine was gone, extinguished by cold, hunger, and despair. That night, the screams of wounded soldiers in the Ottoman camp were said to be so loud that they were heard within the city walls, a haunting testament to the suffering. The Sultan had to accept the unthinkable. He had been defeated. The order was given, retreat. The great siege was over. The withdrawal was as agonizing as the siege itself. The mighty Ottoman army, which had marched towards Vienna with such pomp and confidence, now trudged away in shame and misery. They abandoned their heavy cannons and siege equipment, burning what they couldn't carry. The fields around Vienna became a graveyard of war material, a monument to a failed ambition. Their journey home was a descent into hell. The rains continued, turning roads into impassable rivers of mud. Snowstorms blinded them. Icy winds cut through their ragged clothes. Soldiers, already weakened, collapsed and died by the thousands along the road. It was a long, slow procession of defeat, a stark contrast to the triumphant march they had envisioned. For the people of Vienna, watching from their battered walls, the sight of the retreating army was a miracle. Against all odds, they had endured. Their small city had stood defiant and turned back the tide. The failure at Vienna in 1529 was more than just a single military defeat for the Ottoman Empire. It marked a crucial psychological and strategic turning point. For the first time, the westward expansion of Suleiman the Magnificent had been decisively halted. The myth of Ottoman invincibility was shattered, while the empire would remain a dominant power for centuries, and would even return to besiege Vienna again in 1683. The momentum had been lost. The 1529 siege demonstrated that Ottoman power had its limits, that European resistance, even when fragmented, could succeed. This event echoed across Europe, a symbol of Christian perseverance against a seemingly unstoppable force. It signaled the beginning of a long stalemate on the continent's eastern frontier, defining the political and cultural boundaries that would shape European history for the next 300 years. The old fortifications of Vienna, whose ruins can still be seen today, are not just remnants of a bygone era. They are scars of a pivotal moment when a city under siege held the fate of a continent in its hands and refused to let go. Vienna had not just saved itself, it had redrawn the map of the future.